Hi, this is Albert Munasar, parent of Sarah Munasar. SRC has been good for us in the sense that she has come a long way because of the personalized attention that they were able to give to us. She has been able to get the attention that she needs to be able to catch up. Sarah initially was a bit behind, and now we think she is well on her way to being able to be a functional student at her level and even be able to surpass what she needs to be because of the attention that she was able to get at SRC. Thank you very much for the time, and thank you for giving the dedication that she needs to become a better student.
Good evening and welcome to the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. Through this platform, we have conversations that give helpful tips about how to be a better parent each day. And today we're pleased to have Andrea Gopaul in studio with us to discuss depression and anxiety among children and teens. Now, for some dealing with depression, it drains energy, hope, and drive, making it difficult to take steps that would help you to feel better. And sometimes we know that just thinking about the things that you should do to feel better, like exercising or spending time with friends, can seem exhausting or sometimes even impossible to put into action. Now, today's discussion is meant to shed some light on depression and anxiety so that whether or not you're dealing with it, or maybe someone you know is challenged in this area of life, we can be equipped with tools to support. So, joining us now here this evening is Andrea Gopaul. So, Andrea, thank you so much for taking time to join in on the conversation. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you, Alina, for inviting me once again. Very happy to be with you and the parents of your school.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, today we're talking about understanding and anxiety and depression. So, my first prompt to you is, can you take a moment to share with our viewing audience what is anxiety, what is depression, what's the difference between the two? If you could share some info on that for us.
Okay. Well, anxiety is an expected part of life. What it is, it's your body's natural response to stress. So it is a feeling, anxiety is a feeling that produces physical symptoms. So some of those physical symptoms may be things like dry mouth, rapid breathing, increased heart rate, and stuff like that, nausea, feeling blank. So that is what anxiety is. Um, that is regular anxiety. But sometimes someone can have anxiety to such an extent that it affects their life significantly. So they are worried, there are physical symptoms, and it is getting out of control. So that is actually a classification in our DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, and it has many different types of anxiety that can be diagnosed. Alina?
Okay, totally understand. And when we start crossing over into depression, um, from what you're sharing, I'm understanding that anxiety is really connected to worry that has the manifestation of what we could call maybe negative symptoms. But when we get into depression, what is depression?
Physical.
Sorry, tell me that again, please.
Oh, depression is depression is also something that affects our moods. It's basically when we feel some emotional changes in ourselves, like sadness, anger. Depression is also a normal part of life, but some people have it at a different level. We feel depression after a death, maybe after a trauma or something like that, some kind of disappointment. But it usually goes away in a fairly short space of time, within a couple weeks for the most. But when we move into depression that is lasting for months and is not going away and it is getting worse, and we are seeing signs of emotional changes like that sadness that is lingering. Sometimes there's that anger. It is changing our whole emotional system. We start to become very eventually, when is untreated, people start having frequent thoughts of death and dying, and their future seems bleak and hopeless. And they eventually lose interest in activities that they used to love previously, and their family and friends, they don't want to do that anymore. So, apart from the emotional changes that we see when people feel depressed, we also have behavioral things like tiredness, loss of appetite. Sometimes people use drugs or alcohol to control the symptoms, and angry outbursts. And sometimes they even think of self harm. Alina, yes.
Yes. So if you were to then share with us, Andrea, the difference between anxiety and depression, what would you say are the major demarcations that would help a person to understand the difference between whether they're experiencing anxiety or they're probably experiencing depression? What is it? What is it? What are the main differences between them?
It can be so very close, and they actually commonly occur together. They do. So, in terms of anxiety and also depression, one of the main symptoms that they have a lot alike is that feeling of tiredness and tiredness. Anxiety usually doesn't have that amount of negative thinking that you feel. An anxious person wouldn't think of suicide the way a depressed person would. So that is one of the main differences there.
Okay, I
Yeah.
understand. So even as we continue on in the conversation, once we understand what anxiety is about, what depression is about, the effects of it, but sometimes I know for a lot of persons, it's helpful when we could get into understanding what causes it, because for a lot of people, we could make a connection between dealing with it once we're able to identify the root cause. So can you take a moment to share with us what are the differences between anxiety and depression in terms of the causes? How do we recognize to be able to know these are the things in our life that could potentially cause anxiety and depression?
Okay. What causes depression in people? Elena, are we speaking about the clinical type of depression or regular depression?
You could share on both, because I'm sure there are persons who are listening that even as they think about it, they would want to be able to recognize the difference between quote unquote regular depression as opposed to this is something I can work through on my own, and maybe recognizing if it's a bit deeper than that and I probably need to get some help. So I think sharing on both would definitely be a great help to our listening audience.
Okay, so I'll take depression first. Depression sometimes happens to us when we are dealing with disappointment. It could be disappointment for the parents, it might be disappointment in marriage. For students, it might be disappointment in their examination grades, SEA. It may be disappointment in something their parents promised them. So disappointment is one reason why children or people in general feel depressed. Another reason for depression, and this is moving a little more to the clinical side, is trauma. Something outside our normal range of experiences that we are totally unprepared to deal with, and our mind does not know how to process it. So we kind of get stuck in a place of feeling some very bad things and memories and all of that. Another thing that causes depression sometimes is grief. Because grief, there are stages of grief, about 5 or 6, depending on the model that you use. And one of the stages of grief is actually depression.
Right.
So, and then finally, what brings us across into the depression as something I would just call blue jeans.
Right.
Pun intended on the word blue. So, and also what helps us to figure out if it warrants clinical attention is the length of time that the symptoms persist and the severity. So after a little while, regular depression goes away, but after a long time, a month, 2 months, years, clinical depression can persist and seems to get worse.
Right.
So
sorry,
I'll move across to. Go ahead. I was going to move across to anxiety.
Even before
Causes.
You move to anxiety, if you'd allow me, we have just a comment that I wanted to highlight and get your input. We have someone who mentioned and said, correct me, but depression can have 2 effects. 1, loss of doing things, or 2, throw yourselves into extra things, even if you don't like it, in order to distract yourself. So even as you were talking about the causes of depression and causes of anxiety, I just wanted to use this as a prompt to ask you, is it then that if a person is finding, I have loss of interest for an extended amount of time, or I'm just throwing myself into things to distract me from life for an extended amount of time, is that an indication that clinical help is needed?
Yes, usually when we start to lose interest in the things that were usually fascinating to us, it could be hobbies, sports activities, even relationships like family and friends, that general loss of interest. And it is not easy.
Andrea, sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear you for a minute.
They just are.
Okay, so we're just going to work with Andrea. She seems to be having a moment with her technical challenge. So give us 1 minute to check in with her, and we will definitely return with our conversation about depression and anxiety. Introducing the SRC Elementary Program. Through the SRC Elementary Program, your child will have a fun time learning as we keep our kids productively engaged through participation in various learning structures. Learning activities include math readiness, reading readiness, theater arts. literacy skills, STEM activities, and positive social skills. Now, in order to give individual attention, our classes are small, so register today.
Hi, this is Albert Munasar, parent of Sarah Munasar. SRC has been good for us in the sense that she has come a long way because of the personalized attention that they were able to give to us. She has been able to get the attention that she needs to be able to catch up. Sarah initially was a bit behind, and now we think she is well on her way to being able to be a functional student at her level and even be able to surpass what she needs to be because of the attention that she was able to get at SRC. Thank you very much for the time, and thank you for giving the dedication that she needs to become a better student.
Yes, hi, Andrea. And we're back. Audience, we apologize
Hi,
for that technical challenge that we had a moment ago. But even as we jump right back into the conversation, you were sharing that if it is that a person experiences that loss of interest in doing things for extended time, or find themselves distracting themselves for extended time, you're saying it is indeed an indication that additional help should be sought out?
Yes, well, once your life has begun to be affected negatively, your relationships, your schoolwork, your job, your chores, because you don't feel to get up to do your chores if you're an adult, or once it starts affecting your life negatively, you know that you have got to do something.
Okay, totally understand. Thank you so much for weighing in on that. So even as we continue on, I wanted to be able to take a moment to be able to have you share on the prevalence of anxiety and depression among children and teens. Because of course you recognize that it's very easy to assume that anxiety and depression would only affect adults, but we know that it does affect children and teens. So can you take a minute to share with our viewing audience about the impact of anxiety and depression among teens and what parents should understand as it relates to children and teens being affected by anxiety and depression?
Okay. Well, statistically, 1 in 4 people have a mental health disorder. And that includes a whole big figure. But in terms of anxiety, it's probably less than 10%. But when you combine that figure with other mental health situations like depression, behavioral problems, and ADHD, because they commonly occur together, the rates are increased. So basically, 1 in 4 people have a mental health issue, and the most common is anxiety/depression. It is also, as a guidance officer, it is one of the most prevalent things. It is one of the things students come to me about very, very often. It's probably highest on the list. Alina?
Yes. So even as I know you just shared statistically about how prevalent anxiety and depression are, but sometimes might think, oh, the child just exaggerating, the child just being lazy, or whatever. Can you share with parents what, if it is that you're looking at behaviors that are undesirable in terms of that sadness, that lethargy, that disinterest. Could you share with parents what they should look for in their children, in their children's behavior that speaks to helping them recognize whether there is a challenge maybe with anxiety or depression, so they would know how to recognize it and be able to determine whether action is needed?
Okay. Well, both anxiety and depression have physical symptoms. So for anxiety, there would be the child would have sleeping difficulties, either trying very hard to fall asleep and can't. There would be things like complaining of headaches continuously. There would be things like stomach aches, or sometimes profuse perspiration if they are feeling very anxious, or even chest pain. And it can even go as far as an anxiety attack, where, that is when they are totally overwhelmed by the feeling of anxiety. The mind goes blank. There are physical symptoms like that profuse sweating, dry mouth, those sorts of things. So if your child is complaining of those things, please take it seriously. That would be for anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even as we continue on chatting, how are we then to cope with anxiety and depression? And coping here is really looking at how parents cope with, especially if they come to a place where they recognize that their child is being affected by anxiety or depression. How do parents cope with that? And how do they support their children in coping with it?
Okay. Well, first, we must look at the causes for anxiety. Sometimes one of the causes of anxiety is simply parents' disapproval. Children feel anxious because they think they are not meeting the expectations of their parents. I work at some schools that are very high performing, and sometimes even the expectation of the principal and teachers makes the child very anxious. So I'm saying that pressure, actually, statistically, if we were to measure anxiety and stress among students and adults, students actually feel more anxiety and stress that leads to depression because they do not have the coping skills that adults do. So apart from parents' disapproval, another thing that causes anxiety at school is peer pressure. And so this peer pressure eventually leads to social anxiety. Teenagers are very conscious of themselves, fitting into groups, looking a certain way and certain behaviors, and peer pressure is a cause for anxiety. Examinations is a cause for anxiety. Sometimes if they are unprepared, we are in this COVID experience, and students have started to write exams this week, O-level exams and A-level exams. So there is an amount of anxiety because students may feel unprepared. And yeah, so those are some of the things that cause anxiety. Apart from puberty, the hormones that are fluctuating, that causes that moodiness. Anxiety is one of the moodiness. Teenagers tend to be have these angry outbursts. And sometimes if they are trying to cope with their anxiety or depression and they're drinking or using drugs, and they are hiding it from their parents, that can also be a cause of anxiety. So in that mix, we are seeing there's some things that parents can do to reduce the anxiety in terms of their expectations that they communicate to their child. Yeah, so that is one of the things that they can do, Alina.
So, what you're sharing with us then, Andrea, is that one of the main ways parents can help children to cope with the extent to which they're affected by anxiety and even depression is really looking at what we communicate to the children and how we communicate with them, because that builds for expectation and so on. But for parents who maybe have a child who is affected by anxiety for whatever reason, what can the parent do internally for him or herself to cope with that understanding?
Okay, so parents, once upon a time I read a book. The name of the book was Kids Have Feelings Too. And by the time I got through the foreword of the book, I was in tears. At that time, my children were younger. And it's, as adults, we think that we have all the reason in the world to be stressed, depressed, anxious, and kids, they don't have to work, they don't know where, for their next meal, they don't have to take care of bills, and we assume they have no reason to be anxious, depressed,
Right.
or stressed. But we need to recognize their feelings, acknowledge it, whether it's their disappointment, and do not minimize their feelings, their frustration, because kids have feelings too. As adults, we have better coping skills than they do. Okay, so we need to listen to their perception. What we can do as parents is share some of our own anxieties and disappointments that caused anxiety or depression and build a connection.
Right.
We tend to have that generation gap. Teens feel very judged by their parents. So building a connection by sharing some of your own stuff could build that.
Okay.
Another thing a parent can do is they can communicate with friends and family who may be facing similar situations, to know that they are not alone, and that will be a kind of support. So I would encourage that the child share their feelings and not keep it in and dwell on it. So we need to listen. If the child is unable to articulate, we need to look for the physical signs in the behavior and the mood. Alina, yes.
Right. Okay, so what we want to be able to do, Andrea, at this time is what we want to be able to get into some audience Q&A for questions that persons would have for us. So as we transition across, the first question we have, let me see if I can pull it up here, says, oh, it's a big question. It's covering the screen, but it says, it's my belief that many persons do not understand the realness of anxiety and depression, and persons are usually dismissed when they talk about having the illness. Where can we learn more about this illness so that we could be a better support?
Excellent question. I love it. I have recently completed a paper on mental health issues specific to the church. And
Okay.
I did some research on how the pastors and church react to mental health issues. And part of my survey had to do with mental health awareness in different areas of mental health, which some of the areas the pastors scored high and some scored low. Areas, because sometimes people really believe you make this stuff up. Even years ago, when I was a child, a teenager, one of my high school friends had depression and would be talking to me on the phone about it. And my dad would said to me, he doesn't know what depression is, maybe that's somebody unable to cope or whatever, not realizing that depression and anxiety are mental health issues. So
Right.
it is real, and people need to inform themselves. It is in school, the reaction from teachers and stuff to many mental health concerns is that um, they're looking for attention. That is it. You're saying you're going to commit suicide because you're looking for attention. You,
Right.
yeah. So that is our response generally. The other thing is mental health issues in the Caribbean and in the world at large.
Yeah.
It's something with a stigma attached. And even
Yeah.
if people do recognize it, they try to hide it. They
Right.
don't believe. I've had to call in a parent. A child was threatening to hurt themselves, and the mom didn't believe or want to hear about it.
Right.
Had to send for the other parent to try to take this child to the clinic and all of that. So, yes, lack of awareness is the main problem. If we do not know what we are dealing with, if we do not know what to look for, it's very difficult to respond to it. So we need, as people, because of the prevalence of mental health issues around the world, where 1 in every 4 people will experience a mental health issue in their lifetime, we need to learn about it. Just like how we would learn about technology, we learn about harming the environment, we also need to learn about mental health because of the prevalence. So these mental health issues that you can experience throughout your life can be things in childhood, straight into adulthood, adult issues like losing your memory through dementia and all of that. So
Right.
definitely that awareness needs to be improved. We have the internet. Read, type it in. Even if you don't know what you're looking for, just type in the symptoms. My child is sleeping too much. My child doesn't want to come out of their room. And
Yeah.
stuff will come up. Stuff will come up. And of course, most schools are equipped with guidance officers and school social workers. So you have your help right on site if you're attending a public school. And for private schools like yours, there are professionals like myself
Yes.
who offer pro bono service um, in terms of counseling.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and that's true because the Caribbean Parenting Show is sponsored by SRC Private Primary. And at SRC, we do have Ali Max and Associates that provides counseling services both to students and parents for whatever reason that parents can say, hey, I need to talk to someone, and they'll be able to connect. So you're quite right. Even as we go to our next question, Andrea, here we go. Question says, how do I determine whether I have anxiety disorder or depression as opposed to something else?
Well, you can't determine that yourself. We are
Right,
moving into the realm of mental health professionals. So
right.
if you notice that you are constantly anxious or depressed, and I think we know the symptoms. We know when something is wrong, even though we don't know the clinical symptoms. Your first thing to do would be to tell your doctor. Tell your doctor, because these conditions are medical conditions. It's not something people made up. It's in our
And
big,
Andrea,
yeah,
if you'd allow me to ask you, when you say tell your doctor, are you referring to the general practitioner,
yes,
GP doctor?
yes,
Because
yes,
most people wouldn't think that if they're having physical symptoms as a result of emotional issues, that they're going to go to a GP for that. So you're sharing with our audience that if you're having these symptoms, you want to go to your doctor, because it's a medical situation, and he or she would be able to direct you from there.
Definitely.
Okay.
Anxiety and depression, if it is not the regular one that goes away in a couple weeks, is medical. It needs medical advice. And if it goes untreated for a prolonged period of time, because the one that needs medical treatment does not really go away.
Right.
It doesn't go away. It tends to get worse without treatment.
Okay.
And when you are ready, we'll talk about the treatments.
Okay. And even before we go on to the next question, I want to encourage those who are viewing. I mean, we're getting into some good hot button topics here. So if you know persons that would really benefit from this conversation and viewing, be sure to share, tag them, share the link, whatever you have to do. But make sure people are coming in to view, whether live as we are right now or on the replay. So parents and adults in general can benefit from this discussion. Now, the next one, Andrea, is not so much a question, it's a comment, but I want to ask a question based on this. And it says, depression is becoming more prevalent in our society, especially since COVID-19. We need to support each other now more than ever. The question I want to ask based on this comment is, if it is, let's say a person has a friend who is challenged by depression, anxiety, what are ways persons can support others who are affected by anxiety and depression?
Well, first, I think people need to admit to themselves, they need to get out of the denial phase. So as a friend, you can actually say to your friend what you have noticed, the changes in their behavior. So that may bring a little bit of a reality check and let them know, in terms of mental health, we say it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
It's okay if you're not okay. And that's what friends are for, to stick with you even when things are not okay. And part of that support can be encouraging your friend to read about it, or maybe you can read up about the symptoms you are seeing and, WhatsApp it to your friend or whatever, or you can accompany them to when they are telling their doctor about what is happening. So companioning your friend is a very big thing, because as with all mental health issues, the more support we have from family and friends, the more likely we are to cope better. Because if we have clinical anxiety and depression, these are illnesses that can be treated, not cured, unless, of course, you have some kind of spiritual intervention and some kind of faith healing occurs. But just like diabetes, just like other things, diabetes can't be cured, just treated. In the same way, if you have like clinical anxiety or depression, it needs to be treated by your doctor.
Understood. Our next question says, what are some natural ways to overcome anxiety or depression?
Okay. I could give an anxiety control procedure that I gave to the kids at my school just before they began exam. Something very simple. If you are feeling very anxious as an adult, maybe before a presentation at work, maybe before you do your driving test, or give some kind of speech, let's see how we can control the anxiety with this easy procedure that takes a minute. So you basically close your eyes and do some deep breathing. Deep breathing is where you take a very deep breath and hold it for 7 seconds and exhale very slowly to 7 counts. Just taking about 3 to 5 deep breaths actually improves our mental function. Because when we are anxious, sometimes we go blank. We go absolutely blank in a speech, at a test, something. And if you are still feeling anxious, you can roll your shoulders, you can stretch out your legs a little bit, and then open your eyes and give yourself a positive self-talk. Our mind is such a thing that we can talk to it positively and it will respond positively.
Right.
If we talk to it with negative words, like we're a failure and we can't do anything good, the mind will respond to that. So that is a simple anxiety control procedure. Of course, there are many other ways that we can control our anxiety. For instance, well, our readers, we wouldn't have time to talk about it in detail, but that last example was basically deep breathing. We have things like journaling.
Right.
Writing your feelings can help. You can go online and look for relaxation exercise. For others, things like spending time in prayer and meditation in that spiritual realm actually helps. Studies have shown that when people spend time in prayer, they tend to become more relaxed and calm. Yes,
Okay.
regardless of the religion. Another thing we can do to try to cope is to talk to a trusted friend about our concern and take it from there. So there's also things like mindfulness. So I'm just calling out some of these things, and our readers would have to go online and look for it because, of course, there's no time to go into detail. Probably
Yes.
another show we can explain.
Yes,
Some more.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. So, even as we move forward, and we want to give a spotlight this evening on helpful resources for coping with anxiety and depression. So, for persons who want to learn more, where can they turn? Is it just a matter of going online? Are there government agencies? Are there library options? Where can moms, dads, persons find resources, information for learning more about coping with anxiety and depression?
Okay, well, I did mention before you have your mental health professional at your school, your guidance officer or social worker. You, of course, have your medical doctor, which you can tell about the symptoms. And online, you can find support groups, you can find information. I found a very reliable site is WebMD, M as in medical, D as in doctor. And usually, whatever the issue is, you can subscribe to newsletters which give very helpful information about coping. Apart from those resources and personnel, we also have the Child Guidance Clinic. The Child Guidance Clinic is a government agency that comes under the Ministry of Health, and you usually need a referral to go to the Child Guidance Clinic. The referral would usually come from your guidance officer. If your school doesn't have a guidance officer, your principal, or as a parent, you can go in, talk to the teacher, or even if you want to walk in. They usually do not like walk-ins because they need a bit of background information on the child. So the Child Guidance Clinic is free if the condition is one. There's a team that functions at the Child Guidance Clinic, psychiatric social workers, um, clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, the doctor who is a psychiatrist. There are also developmental personnel there. So the Child Guidance Clinic is where you can get free help. And also, if your child needs to take medication, a prescription would be written if necessary, and you can usually get the medications free of charge right from the clinics, the government clinics.
Okay. Thank you. So, I mean, this definitely has been a deep session talking about understanding anxiety and depression. So, even as we start to wind down on this chat, Andrea, I just want to ask you, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to be able to leave with parents consideration as they move forward, probably considering that they may have to deal with it with a child or so? What should parents keep in mind?
Just remember what I said. Kids have feelings too, and we need to understand that their feelings are real, not just because they are kids. You know, our parenting style in the Caribbean, we feel that licks could fix anything.
Right.
Or at least we used to feel so. But there are some things that the licks really cannot fix, and we need to listen. Reach out for some support to the professionals around you or friends. And if something is different about your child as compared to other children, or you just think that something is wrong, it has just that gut feeling, please reach out, try to research, talk to somebody and get that help, because children suffer silently for years. I'm in the secondary school system, and I've met children who have had depression and anxiety issues since primary school. From usually it's onset by puberty around like 9 years old, and they come to me in the middle of secondary school because nobody believes them.
Yeah.
Believe your child. At least give them that listening ear.
Okay, Andrea, thank you so much for taking time to chat and share with our viewing audience, and even those who are tuning during the replay later on using the social media links. I appreciate you giving your time. And mummies, daddies, aunties, uncles, I really want to thank you as well for taking time to join us for this episode of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. Now, as a bi-weekly show, it's streamed digitally each Wednesday at 8 p.m. and Sunday at 4 p.m. right here on this channel. So be sure to like, subscribe, share, tag your friends, share the link with your WhatsApp contacts, because it was such an awesome conversation. And many of it, whether we personally deal with depression or not, could definitely benefit from the wealth of information that Andrea shared this evening. So we appreciate that you tuned in for this episode, and we trust that you are now better equipped as a parent to support your children and, by extension, your family unit based on the information shared. So I'm Alina Lewis, and until next time, take care.